Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A Christian group in Lethbridge, which helps our most vulnerable, is being told to apply for new permits in the way they help our homeless. Federal Tory leader Pierre Poilievre says Canadian kids are writing letters to Santa, not asking for toys, but for food. And the CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews talks about what she saw after returning from southern Israel following the Hamas attacks of October 7th.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The folks at Streets Alive Christian Mission are stunned that the City of Lethbridge has directed them they apply for new permits for a number of services they offer for some of our city's most vulnerable. Now, to chat about this in more detail is co-founder of Streets Alive, Ken Kissick, who joins us from here in Lethbridge. Ken, what are your concerns, and what concerns have you heard from our city officials?
Unfortunately, the city officials haven't really shared why they need the new permits and why we can't continue to do this, provide those services, which we have provided for over 20 years under our religious assembly permit. And our concern is that they're trying to change a permit that has been active for 20 years.
So what specifically would the new permits be for?
They're looking for us to get a medical facility, a medical outpatient for our foot care and our paramedics. They're looking for us to get personal services for the haircuts because that's what a salon would be under, but we don't charge, it's volunteer. And then we're looking for a resource permit for us to give out clothing, for us to be able to do our financial trusteeship, for us to be able to provide lockers for individuals while they go over to the courthouse, and to be to allow people to use this address for their mail to come to, because when they're on the street, they have no address.
Now, you're appealing the new permits, and have you chatted with Mayor Blaine Hagan about this?
We have appealed it to the Subdivision Appeal Board, and we have a hearing on the 21st of December at 5 o'clock in City Council chambers. And so at that point in time, we will make our case that we believe that we should be allowed to simply continue under our current permit. And we are asking them to overturn the order for new permits and any related stop order.
Thanks so much for your time today, Ken. That was Ken Kissick, co-founder of Streets Alive Mission here in Lethbridge. Bridge City News reached out to the City of Lethbridge for comment. In a release, they said, after receiving a complaint of potential contraventions of the land use bylaw, the city investigated the use of the property at 323 4th Street South and determined that certain activities fell outside of the scope of the approved development permit. The Development Authority requested that Streets Alive comply with the land use bylaw by getting permit approvals by October the 31st. When this did not occur, a stop order was issued on November 10th requiring Streets Alive apply for certain development permits or cease certain activities by August 9th of 2024. A stop order has been appealed to the Subdivision and Appeal Board, an independent tribunal that will render a decision based on hearing evidence at the appeal hearing on December the 21st. The province announced that it'll be providing the City of Lethbridge $1 million to fund 50 temporary winter shelter spaces. They'll be run by the Blood Tribe Department of Health and will be located in a trailer at the main shelter here in Lethbridge. Government officials say the province provides more than $3 million annually to fund the operation of 121 year-round shelter spaces in our city. With the new funding, those at risk of being homeless will now have access to more than 170 emergency shelter spaces in the City of Lethbridge. A food bank in Lethbridge received a funding boost to help with a very cool upgrade to their facility. BCN's Naveen Day was chilling at the Interfaith Food Bank and files this report.
Thanks to a donation from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Interfaith Food Bank in Lethbridge was able to upgrade their cold storage facilities, allowing them to receive and distribute more food to those who need it. Daniel McIntyre with the Interfaith Food Bank Society says food insecurity is a growing issue here in southern Alberta.
We are seeing the costs of living are rising faster than incomes and income supports. We're seeing mental health as a major issue that is preventing people from maintaining or retaining their employment. We're also experiencing an affordability crisis that is allowing a lot of people who don't normally struggle with food security to feel what that's like. And here locally, over 5,000 people are struggling with this as an ongoing issue, which is a major problem that food banks are really trying to work to long-term solutions for.
Aaron Lowe, the president of the Lethbridge, Alberta East Stake for the Mormon Church, says they funded this initiative because it is what Jesus would do.
And certainly he would want us to try and help those who are in need, and we have many of those, and as Danielle has explained, an increasing number in our community. So we were so grateful to have this opportunity. I think one of the things that we've thought about is that traditionally we think of churches as a place where you go on Sunday and sit and learn about God. I think church is more than that, and certainly by participating in the community and looking for ways that we can help those in need, this is what church should be.
And according to McIntyre, the capacity to store more perishables has improved their abilities to help more families.
Prior to this upgrade, we were averaging about 70 to 80,000 pounds a month. After the install, in our first full month using the units, we had 100,000 pounds that we were handling here at the food bank. And then the next month, we saw an increase of 188,000 pounds that we handled. Primarily that increase being attributed to the fresh and frozen capacity that we're able to now accept.
The total cost of the project was around $140,000, most of which was covered by the church. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
The province announced support for communities that were affected by flooding waters earlier this year. Public Safety and Emergency Services Minister Mike Ellis says up to $68 million will be made to a number of communities, including Edson, Whitecourt, and Yellowhead County, which were impacted by the June floods.
A cost share will be applied in which all applicants will cover 10%, and the government of Alberta will cover the 90% of the eligible costs. For homeowners, this funding is capped at $500,000 per applicant. We will review applications on a case-by-case basis to provide impacted communities and residents with the support and assistance they need. Applications are now open until February 26, 2024, and I encourage affected individuals and businesses, of course, to apply today.
Strathcona County in central Alberta is preparing to host thousands of Alberta's best athletes, coaches, and officials. The 25th Alberta Summer Games will be taking place there in 2026. Alberta Tourism and Sport Minister Joseph Scow says this is a great event which will help launch the careers of many athletes.
We've been supporting these athletes since 1974 to make sure that when they go and compete and represent Alberta on the national and international stage, they're putting their best foot forward. And every single one of the athletes who compete at the Alberta Summer Games is going to go pro. They may go pro in their athletic field of choice or in something else completely different. But the lessons they learn at the Alberta Summer Games will carry them throughout their professional careers in their lifetime and benefit them. Things like teamwork, time management, stress management, healthy living, leadership, and of course, anything else that's going to benefit them. And the things they learn here will carry them throughout the rest of their lives.
There's some talk that Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley may resign. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says that's what a lot of the Alberta media are hearing right now.
She was asked about this sort of right after the election. She said she was thinking about her options, thinking about her future. She would let people know when she'd made up her mind. I think it's fair to say perhaps that she hasn't made up her mind yet. She certainly has not said publicly what she's going to do. But there is, I think, a little bit of jostling within the NDP. There are people thinking about who maybe is going to come next. There's certainly some talk about what a convention would look like, what the leadership race would look like.
Mr. Dawson will also explain why Alberta Premier Daniel Smith is in Dubai right now for COP28. He'll have details coming up later in our broadcast. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre addressed his caucus on Wednesday. Poilievre says it will be a challenge for many Canadians to have a Merry Christmas. He says kids who are writing letters to Santa Claus are not asking for toys, but instead for clothing and food for their families. Poilievre says things are getting worse for Canadians after 8 years of a Trudeau government.
Parents stay up late at night, worried how they will keep their homes, after rent prices are rising for the first time in Canadian recorded history faster than wages. That has never happened before. The cost of the average mortgage has more than doubled. The cost of a needed down payment for a new home doubled. Rent has doubled. The last 2 months have been the fastest recorded increases in rent in Canadian history. Yesterday, Justin Trudeau's own housing agency was asked if the government has a plan to close the 3.5 million home gap in our housing supply, and they answered no.
In dealing with our country's ongoing sexual misconduct crisis in the military, Federal Defence Minister Bill Blair named the board that will lead the review into Canada's military colleges. The 7-member board will look at the pros and cons in which 2 military colleges operate. They're RMC Kingston and RMC St. Jean.
And in particular, the board's 7 members will consider long-standing cultural concerns in the military college environment, including misogyny and discrimination and the ongoing incidents of sexual misconduct. The board will review the benefits, advantages, and disadvantages of the way in which our military colleges currently operate. They will assess the different possible models for delivering university-level education and military leadership training to naval and officer cadets. The review board will then be responsible to make recommendations on how these colleges must change.
Minister Blair says the board will have a year before a report on its work is due. A new report by the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee says Ottawa needs to do more to help Foreign Service and the foreign policy machinery within Global Affairs Canada. The study says more professionals need to be hired to address staffing issues. It also says foreign language and cultural training is needed, along with an increase in public outreach to Canadians.
We have made 29 recommendations that are designed to strengthen the Foreign Service's already considerable abilities, so it is ready and able to do its important work for Canada today, tomorrow, and in the decades to come. Among the committee's concerns is staffing. The Foreign Service is still feeling the effects of a 10-year suspension in Foreign Service recruitment between 2009 and 2019. We heard that Global Affairs Canada has been relying on short-term contractors and students, but these Band-Aid solutions are less than ideal in developing an experienced workforce that can help Canada be a global leader in the 21st century. Recent events have also underscored the importance of a foreign service that can respond with agility to emergencies.
Police in Las Vegas, Nevada say a suspect is dead following the reports of a shooting at the University of Nevada. Officials say there appeared to be multiple victims, and then the suspect was reported deceased. The university posted a message on social media for students to evacuate the area where the shooting took place near Beam Hall, a campus building that houses the business school. In a separate post, campus police said there was another report of shots being fired in the student union. The White House says it was monitoring the situation in Las Vegas closely. A man from Gaza who's living in a shelter after being displaced 6 times says people at UN-run shelters are now fighting over food. The World Food Program warns the renewed fighting between Israel and Hamas is only going to intensify the catastrophic hunger crisis that already threatens to overwhelm Palestinian civilians. The UN's Humanitarian Aid Office says tens of thousands of people have fled into Rafah and Khan Yunis, where the situation is being described as extremely dire. Political experts say the Israel-Hamas war is hurting U.S. President Joe Biden's standing with Arab-American voters in Michigan. They say his support for Israel could seriously hamper his re-election campaign in the key swing state next year.
Michigan has been a battleground state in the last several presidential elections, with several close races. Of course, in 2016, Michigan went pretty narrowly for Donald Trump, and then in 2020, it was won by Joe Biden by a little bit larger margin, but still relatively close. In 2024, the upcoming race, I expect it's going to be very close. Losing Michigan in combination with a state like Pennsylvania or Georgia would turn the election in the other direction. Michigan has the largest concentration of people with a Middle Eastern background anywhere outside the Middle East. So Arab Americans constitute a pretty significant chunk of voters in Michigan, and typically they've been pretty supportive of Democratic candidates. For Biden, the big concern would be losing the enthusiasm of Arab American voters that turnout could be lower because they don't feel that Biden has done enough to support the rights of Palestinians.
Yael Eckstein is the president and CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. She shared what she witnessed on a recent trip to southern Israel. Eckstein says the power of miracles is very evident as the Israeli defense against the Hamas terrorists continues. She shared details on TBN's Centerpoint program.
Whether you live in Israel or America, wherever you are, that Israel is a country of heroes. I visited with people whose homes were burned down, whose family was murdered, who have loved ones right now being held hostage in Gaza. And what I saw across the board is they refuse to be victims, that they've been empowered to look for God, to look for miracles, to look for the light. And when I first arrived actually in Be'eri, it's a town right on the Gaza border, that 10% of their population was either killed or kidnapped. And I saw a man going through the ashes of a home, literal ashes. There was nothing left. And I went and asked him his story, and he said, "This is the home of my mother-in-law. 8 of the family members were kidnapped. My father-in-law was killed. And my mother-in-law just got back from Gaza a few days ago. She was returned by Hamas. And she said to me, 'Go and bring back some of my belongings from my house.'" He said, "I didn't have the heart to tell her everything's been burned down. So I'm going through the ashes and I'm looking for something, for anything that I could bring back to her." And I blessed him and I continued on with the tour. And I came back an hour later and he was sitting next to 2 menorahs. The only thing he found in the ashes were 2 menorahs, which symbolizes what the people of Israel are going through right now.
Praying for peace in the Middle East and for Ukraine. Well, we enjoyed some incredible temperatures here in southwestern Alberta again, above 10 degrees, but the warmer weather will be leaving us fairly soon. Full weather details are on deck. You know, it felt a lot more like summer here in Lethbridge than being just a couple of weeks away from the first official day of winter. Tonight, however, a cold front is moving in, bringing some rain mixed with snow and a low near zero. Thursday, expect more snow developing in the forecast and the temperature remaining steady around the freezing mark, cooling off slightly to -2 on Friday under a mainly cloudy sky. It should only be partly cloudy on Saturday with a high near +1. Sunday, expect more sunshine with the mercury increasing to 6 degrees. Monday, cooling off slightly to -4, and Tuesday, warming up under a mainly clear sky to 0. Now, the average high for this time of year is +1 with an average low of -11. The record high on this day was 16 degrees set back in 1987, and the record low was a very cold -34 back in 1956. The sun rose at 8:13 and set at 4:32. Let's see how Thursday is shaping up across the rest of the country now. Expect rain and a high of 8 degrees for Vancouver, a good chance of showers developing at 9 for Victoria. Periods of snow and a high of 0 for Calgary on Thursday. Snow mixed with rain and a high of +2 for Edmonton. Showers and +2 degrees as well as on tap for Regina. Rain mixed with snow and 0 for Saskatoon. It should be mainly cloudy and 5 degrees in Winnipeg on Thursday. In the central part of the country, expect rain and 5 degrees for Toronto, snow and -5 for Ottawa, a chilly -10 under a mainly cloudy sky in Montreal. Over in Atlantic Canada, it should be mainly sunny and -6 in Fredericton. Pretty much the same picture at Halifax, sunshine and a high of -4. Expect flurries and -1 for Charlottetown, and in St. John's, clouds, flurries with a high of only -2 degrees on Thursday. The Bank of Canada is keeping its key interest rate steady at 5% because higher interest rates are restraining spending. The central bank says a cooling job market and weaker growth suggests demand is no longer outpacing supply in the economy. Inflation currently sits at 3.1%. Officials say this slowdown is necessary to restore price stability. The central bank is not ruling out future rate hikes just yet, saying it is still concerned about risks to the outlook for inflation and remains prepared to raise rates further if needed. Imports fell and exports made a small gain as Canada's merchandise trade surplus grew to $3 billion in October. Stats Canada says that compares to a revised surplus of $1.1 billion in September. The agency says imports of metal and non-metallic mineral products dropped 14.7%. Motor vehicle parts and sales also moved down 5.8%. Exports of aircraft and other transportation equipment, however, gained 15%. They were offset by a 1.2% drop in energy products and a 3.5% decline in basic and industrial chemical, plastic, and rubber products. Google is launching an artificial intelligence model trained to behave in human-like ways. The phase-out of less sophisticated versions of Gemini called Nano and Pro are being incorporated into Google's AI-powered chatbot Bard and its Pixel 8 Pro smartphone. Google is promising that Bard will become more intuitive and better at tasks that involve planning. Gemini's biggest advances won't come until early next year, and the company says it will eventually be integrated into its search engine. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 101 points on the day to finish at 20,274. The Dow was down 70 points to 36,054. The S&P 500 was down 17 on the day to 4549, and the Nasdaq was down 83 points to 14,146. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 313 to 69.19 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 15 cents to 256 US. Gold was up 4 cents to $2,025.59 US an ounce, and silver was down 26 cents to $23.90 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.14 per bushel, barley's at $6.75, canola's at $14.30, and corn is at $8 per bushel. Live cattle were down $5.05 to $163.45. Feeder cattle January contract was down $4.55 to $210.15, and lean hogs were up 73 cents to $67.55. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.58 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the province announced that it'll be providing the city of Lethbridge $1 million to fund 50 temporary winter shelter spaces. They'll be run by the Blood Tribe Department of Health and will be located in a trailer at the main shelter here in Lethbridge. Government officials say the province provides more than $3 million annually to fund the operation of 121 year-round shelter spaces here in our city. You know, there's a lot of chat amongst the media here in Lethbridge and across the province that NDP leader Rachel Notley may resign. We shall hear from our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson shortly. We'll share all of the juicy details with us. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Needing some Christmas spirit? Come and enjoy a festive evening filled with songs of the season, performed by the Lethbridge Christian men and women's choirs and other musical guests. This annual Christmas concert is taking place Saturday, December 9th at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, beginning at 7:30 p.m. Lethbridge's Christmas Hope campaign is in full swing, and there's plenty of opportunities throughout the month of December to spread the holiday spirit by giving to those who are less fortunate. The annual Toy Mountain at Center Village Mall goes until December 22nd. Drop off new unwrapped toys like stuffed animals, toy trucks, baby dolls, and anything fun that brings a smile to a child's face. And that's today's Bridge City News community calendar.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is at the COP28 conference in Dubai. A big promotional item she's pitching are the new tax incentives for carbon capture and storage. Alberta's grants will cover up to 12% of the capital costs. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, it'll cost the province around $5.3 billion, but what will the return on investment be?
Yeah, the government is hoping, I think, for about $35 billion in investment in these projects. So carbon capture and storage is it's a really integral part of the province's emissions reductions plans. Obviously, we have a substantial oil and gas sector, and there pretty much isn't going to be a way to sort of get to net zero or dramatically reduce emissions without carbon capture and storage. So the purpose of this tax incentive, this grant, is to, sort of lure some of this investment to the province, build some of these facilities, upgrade some of the technology, those sorts of things. Now, I believe it is going to be coupled as well with a federal tax incentive of some sort on the same sort of front. The government of Alberta and the federal government had been talking about this, and the feds wanted Alberta to get involved in that sort of thing. So, but this is sort of the keystone item, I would say, that Premier Danielle Smith is bringing with her to the COP conference. Part of her purpose for being there is really to try and drum up investment in Alberta, try and convince maybe some Middle Eastern oil barons, I guess, to put some money into Alberta. So this is one of the big sales items she's going to have there to try and attract some of that investment. So we will see, I guess, if that pays off for her in the short term.
Now, the federal government has been hinting about an emissions cap on the oil and gas sector at COP. What kind of a pushback, Tyler, do you think we'll see from the provincial government? I mean, the Trudeau government already has 2 recent court losses under their belt, so I guess maybe they'll be a little more cautious about legislating these sorts of things?
Well, it's important that you brought up the 2 court cases, because for a long time, the Alberta government had a losing record when it was coming to fighting these sorts of things in court. They lost the carbon tax challenge in 2021. And I think to some extent, the federal government saw that victory and thought, aha, we're on the right track, we're on safe constitutional ground here. And then they went ahead with some of their other measures, Bill C-69, which turned into the Impact Assessment Act, and the plastics ban. And so those are the 2 items that the federal government has recently had trouble with in court. They lost at the Supreme Court on the Impact Assessment Act, which basically overhauled the approval of infrastructure projects, including pipelines. And they lost at the federal court on the plastics ban, on a piece of the plastics ban, I suppose is more accurate. But anyways, Stephen Guilbeault, the federal environment minister, said last week that part of the reason why the emissions cap has been sort of so long coming, a little bit delayed, is because of these 2 court decisions, and they need to really make sure that they are on firmer constitutional ground if they're going to go ahead with it. Now, by no means is that going to stop the Alberta government from saying that this is an unconstitutional infringement on Alberta's right to regulate its natural resources. It's, I think, going to be a massive fight. It's certainly going to be a big fight politically from the bully pulpit. There's going to be a lot of outrage, I think similar to sort of what we've seen with Bill C-69 with the carbon tax. And I would expect there to be a court challenge to it in some fashion sometime down the road. But of course, those take time. You don't get a court hearing, the day after something's announced. But yes, there's, I think, going to be a significant political reaction. I think there's also going to be a fairly significant reaction from industry. And the reason I say that is because given the sort of size of the Alberta oil and gas industry, and given the size of the emissions from that industry, there's really likely no way, I should say, to stay within the emissions cap without curtailing production in some fashion. And so the estimates really vary there on how much production might have to be capped. It could be 600,000 barrels a day. It could be 1.3 million barrels a day. Those are sort of the 2 estimates that have come out in recent months and years. But all of this is also speculation because the cap hasn't been released. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what loopholes there's going to be. We don't know if there's going to be some sort of trading carbon credit system built into it. So really very light on details, but that is supposed to be coming during the COP conference. And when it does, I have no doubt that this will be sort of the next great frontier in difficult relations between Alberta and Ottawa.
Tyler, the province was also up in arms over the federal government's new methane regulations. Now, given, as you mentioned, the plastics ban and the court rulings on the Impact Assessment Act, government officials here in the province are happy to argue that these types of policies are simply unconstitutional.
Absolutely. I think Alberta, because of those 2 victories, now has sort of I don't want to say a moral leg to stand on. That's not quite right. A legal leg to stand on. They have this bit of jurisprudence where they can say, actually, the courts are maybe on our side on some of these things. It changes the texture, I think, a little bit of the conversation. It's not the way that it was during the Jason Kenney years. It's not the same as the discussion about the carbon tax. There have been some of these federal government policies that have been found to trample on Alberta's constitutional jurisdiction. Whether or not the methane emissions rules will fall into that category, I mean, we don't know because it hasn't been challenged in court. But certainly this, I think, has changed the way the Alberta government is able to approach these debates. And so the other thing about the methane regulations, which is, I think, relevant, is there is sort of the Alberta government's talking a little bit about safety because there's 2 things essentially that the regulations do. The first one is to put in a ban on flaring, and the second is to plug methane emissions leaks at sites. And so the government is saying, this is not only unconstitutional, not only is interfering in provincial jurisdiction, but it's also dangerous policy. So And Danielle Smith and Rebecca Schultz, the environment minister, had a very, very fiery statement out earlier this week on that, saying that this was, just a way for Stephen Guilbeault to pad his post-politics resume and things like that. So certainly we're going to hear a lot more about this as well. But I think if an emissions cap comes down, I think that's probably still going to be the big one.
Now, Tyler, there's been some speculation among the media that Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley will consider retiring from politics. What are you hearing right now?
Well, there's certainly chatter about it. I think it's a thing that people are talking about. People are wondering. She was asked about this sort of right after the election. She said she was thinking about her options, thinking about her future. She would let people know when she'd made up her mind. I think it's fair to say perhaps that she hasn't made up her mind yet. She certainly has not said publicly what she's going to do. But there is, I think, a little bit of jostling within the NDP. There are people thinking about who maybe is going to come next. There's certainly some talk about what a convention would look like, what the leadership race would look like. I think there hasn't been a leadership race with the NDP in maybe since 2014. There might have been something at that convention, but it's been a while. I mean, Notley's been essentially the face of the NDP for a very, very long time. And so the party is not only going to have the logistical aspects of this to deal with when she leaves, if she leaves, I should say, in terms of who's going to be running, what's the leadership race going to look like, when is it going to happen, but also then there's going to be a couple of years of brand rebuilding. This has been the Notley NDP for so long. It's going to need to become the whoever NDP by the time the next election rolls around. But so there's certainly, it's a topic of discussion. Absolutely. People are talking about it. People are thinking about it. None of that means she's retiring tomorrow or by the end of the year or something like that. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, until she's made a firm statement. I mean, it's all just speculation at this point in time. Tyler, the NDP, speaking of which, has been hosting a number of town halls across the province, getting input from Albertans on if we should pull out of the CPP and create the Alberta Pension Plan. It seems that a number of people are not in favor. Many seniors are saying, hey, leave our pensions alone. And Premier Smith has suggested that more study needs to be done and a referendum on the subject would need to be held.
Absolutely. And the big difference is that the NDP is holding in-person town halls on the CPP stuff, whereas the government did telephone town halls. They've got, I think Jim Dinning is running a panel that's looking into it. He's going to report back eventually. But the NDP, I think, has really capitalized on some of the concern about this and is holding town halls across the province. And the reason I think that's notable is that they were in Red Deer just a couple days ago and had a couple hundred people out. And Red Deer is not NDP country, generally speaking. But you did have a couple hundred people who are very, very concerned about this. As you said, quite often seniors who are, currently drawing on their CPP and are unsure about what the future might look like, or people nearing retirement who are banking on their CPP payments. So the NDP, I think, is, we've talked in the past about how effective of an opposition they've been in for the past few years. They've really, really capitalized on a handful of issues that the government has taken on, rightly or wrongly, the coal moratorium being a really good example of that. And they're certainly putting a lot of effort into the pension plan stuff. And, whether that's going to pay off in some fashion, it's hard to say because, as you mentioned, this is going to go to a referendum at some point. But the NDP certainly is trying to gin up support for a no vote in that referendum, I would say.
Let's talk healthcare now for just a moment. Alberta Nurses Union is worried over threats of job cuts as collective bargaining looms. Tyler, the union says the province is making a bad situation worse in healthcare by threatening in 2 recent letters to cut and contract out nursing jobs.
So this is sort of linked to that shuffle of the healthcare system that was announced a few weeks ago. Basically, breaking the healthcare system into sort of 4 different units. Alberta Health Services, for example, would become responsible for a smaller piece of the pie, is sort of how it works. So there were these letters, and what the government is saying is, look, we're restructuring the healthcare system. We are contractually obligated to inform the nursing unions that there's going to be some shifts in how things are working. And so they need to notify the nurses that that's going to happen. The government insists that they are not looking to reduce frontline workers, that in fact they are hoping to hire frontline workers. But the nurses unions are saying, look, we got a letter very, very similar to this back in 2019, and it turned out the government wanted to cut 500 jobs. So, I think there's always the fear among nursing unions and it's the job of unions to some extent to worry about the jobs of their members. But there's a big disconnect, I guess is what I'm saying, between what the government is claiming they're doing here and what the nurses union is worried about. But certainly, that's playing into a lot of the fears that Albertans have about the healthcare system right now. We've just come out of a pandemic in the last year or so where we saw the system stretched very thin. People are struggling to get family doctors, and ER wait times are horrible, and children's hospitals are overrun, all those things. So there's a lot of public concern, I think, about anything that the government's going to be doing that could risk making healthcare worse. And certainly the nurses are raising that as well, saying we're already at unsafe levels of staffing and that they don't want to see things get worse. So as I said, big disconnect. But I think the core reason for this has to do with this reform of the healthcare system and what's going to come next there.
Yeah, we need to build back better when it comes to our healthcare system. And like you said, more doctors and nurses are desperately needed. Tyler, we've talked about the Sovereignty Act in the past, and guess what? It finally happened. Premier Daniel Smith announced that it'll be used against the Trudeau government and their clean electricity regulations. Now, is this a matter of the province telling Ottawa to basically stay in your lane?
It is. It's telling Ottawa to stay in its lane and also saying that, look, this actually might be impossible in Alberta. And the government is raising fears that there could be real impacts to the electricity grid if by 2035, I should say, it needs to reach net zero. They've raised concerns about brownouts and blackouts and things like that. Maybe a little bit hard to say how true that will be, 12 years down the line. But they're basically saying that, look, this is going to be harmful to Albertans. This is going to be expensive. We don't support this. And so the way the Sovereignty Act is supposed to work is basically, in this instance, is going to allow public institutions, government employees, for example, to not cooperate with the federal government. So, what does that look like over the next 12 years? I mean, that's a little bit hard to say, but perhaps that would be the federal government looking for information about Alberta's electricity grid, setting up some sort of working group on it, and employees would therefore be able to not participate. It doesn't seem to affect the private sector, which is, I think, notable considering the entire electricity sector in Alberta, more or less, is private, I believe, with the exception, I think, of a couple municipal-owned utilities. So that's basically what it's going to do. Now, the thing that is interesting about it is almost everything that the government announced when they brought up the Sovereignty Act, they could have actually done without the Sovereignty Act. So to some extent, this is largely symbolic. And I don't mean that as a pejorative necessarily, but this is a way to raise awareness of Alberta's concerns. Obviously, there were headlines across the country in a way that there might not have been if the Sovereignty Act hadn't been used. But I think the on-the-ground effects, the practical effects this is going to have remain a little bit unclear, frankly. But of course, this is the first time it's been used, so those things probably will become a little bit clearer in the months and years ahead.
Now, the other thing that came out of the Sovereignty Act announcement, Tyler, was that the province is considering creating a public utility company. What would that potentially look like?
Well, yeah. So Alberta mostly, as I said, has a private electricity market. And so the government is exploring the idea of creating a public electricity company, which is obviously a little bit odd for, a free marketeer like Danielle Smith and a conservative government. But Smith said basically, if it happens, it would be something like Alberta Treasury branches. It would operate, within the larger private market. And it seems to be the idea is that this would be sort of a generator of last resort. If by 2035 there's big problems with the electricity grid, there's projects that can't get financed or are going to, close down or something, this public company could step in and purchase them or run them. I think we're a long ways away from seeing that, frankly. They essentially announced that they're going to look into it to see whether or not it's a good idea or a feasible option. So, it's not like we're going to have the Alberta Electricity Corporation or something pop up in the next couple months and offer discounted electricity, but certainly an interesting wrinkle and a very practical step, I guess, compared to some of the other stuff in the Sovereignty Act motion.
The NDP introduced a bill that would see rent control come to our province. Rents in many cities are simply out of control right now. I talked to a lot of my family, and it's unbelievable, especially in Calgary and Edmonton. It would cap rent increases at 2% for 2 years, and then it would be linked to the Consumer Price Index for, 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years, and then it could never actually go above 5%. So, if you had a high inflation year of 7% inflation or something like that, it would still be capped at 5. This is frankly, I think, unlikely to go anywhere. I don't think the UCP is going to be in favor of rent control. But certainly, this is a little bit like the CPP thing. The NDP has noticed that there is this big issue right now, this thing that is causing a lot of concern to Albertans: affordability, rental prices, housing prices, all that, and they've got a policy proposal for it. So I think there's probably going to be some debate on it. Certainly there's going to be some headlines. There's going to be, it's a long-term political game in some ways, right? They can say when the next election comes around, or at any point in the next few years, saying, look, we tried to get rent control in, we tried to bring down rental prices, and the UCP wouldn't let us do it. So there's the political strategy there as well, in addition to, they probably genuinely do think this will help rental prices for Albertans. So I think unlikely to go anywhere, but certainly an example of the NDP working to be an effective opposition.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks again for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
Plans for the twinning of Highway 3 in southern Alberta have been talked about for almost 50 years, and now it looks like the ball will finally get rolling. Joining us to discuss this is Bill Chapman. He is a Coaldale Town Councillor and also the president of the Highway 3 Twinning Development Association. What better person to have on than Bill? Welcome to Bridge City News, Bill. Great to have you on today.
Well, thank you for inviting me to join you for this meeting today.
Of course, absolutely. So, Bill, first, for anyone not familiar with the Highway 3 Twinning project, can you maybe give us a brief history of this 50-year discussion and what the goals of this project are?
Well, sure, Jeanette, and maybe we can go back even to the turn of the century. Corridor began in the early 1900s and was called the Red Trail. And from 1932, it became a numbered highway following the CP rail. And of course, the Highway 3 was branded as the southern branch of the Trans-Canada Highway. So I do remember as a child in the 1960s, taking over 18 hours just to travel from Calgary to Vancouver through the Crow's Nest Pass to Vancouver, as really this was the key route for Trans-Canada travel. It was certainly a most painful trip, and of course then you had to take the same route back home again.
Right, of course, and of course for people who don't know, it runs from east to west, west to east, right? From Medicine Hat right through to the Crow's Nest into British Columbia, so Saskatchewan to BC, right? And of course, it's dubbed the Crow's Nest Highway, right?
That is correct, yes. And actually, in 1988, this highway became part of the National Highway System. So that's really important for listeners and viewers to note that this highway is actually part of the National Highway System of Canada.
Very interesting. So maybe tell us about phase one. This is from Taber to Burdett, Alberta. So you believe that there are maybe economic, recreational, and tourism benefits, as well as safety benefits, of course. So can you explain maybe what the benefits of the economy would be?
Yes, and as a growing province, we do know that every one of our communities is growing. So the impact of having this highway certainly will be the centerpiece to all of the economic activities that will occur and all the economic growth that is going to take place over the next 10 years. And of course, with the agri-food corridor growing, we're going to see a number of mega projects coming up over the next number of years that really will impact all sorts of service levels in Alberta. And of course, Highway 3 will become the cornerstone to all of these needs in southern Alberta.
That's so interesting. I believe the highway will be rerouted around the various towns along the route, right? So, which, it speeds things up for drivers, which is great, but are you getting any pushback from businesses on who might, businesses that might possibly miss out on potential drive-through business?
I don't think so. I would like to speak for the town of Coaldale, and of course, back in the 50s, the Ministry of Transportation talked about routing highways or major highways around municipalities, mainly for economic and safety reasons, economic or safety and efficiency reasons.
Yeah, 100%.
So that was important to note because Coaldale went through those conversations back in the 50s and again in the 1970s when they actually went to work to twin the highway around Coaldale. And if you remember, the old Highway 3 did go right through downtown Coaldale. And so if you were going to look at today's traffic, not only in numbers, but also in regards to the type of traffic that's occurring on Highway 3, downtown Coaldale would not be able to accommodate the amount and the size of traffic that's going through our community today. So if you look at history and then go to what we've encountered today, that the town of Coaldale has already been bypassed once. That being said, our community has grown 4 times that number since the 1970s. We're a community of over 9,000 population today. So if we translate that theory to other municipalities across our corridor, I don't doubt that there'll be any concerns about bypassing. I know that chambers of commerce are on side with Highway 3 twinning. They believe that this will be a major source of economic boost to the community in terms of not only travelers, but also economic benefit to the communities. And we know that people still need to come to town for groceries, for parts, for gas, for sports, for school, for church.
Yeah, you name it.
It will. People will still come to town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I think of the Highway 3 twinning project, of course, the main thing that comes to mind is safety. So, I mean, this could potentially cut down on a lot of accidents and fatalities that we hear about quite a bit. So, what do the statistics tell us about improving the safety with the twinning of Highway 3?
That's a really good question, and we know that to bring out statistics on fatalities or collisions, all those sorts of things, in my opinion, is that one fatality is one statistic too many.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
We need to identify the fact that twinning Highway 3 will be important to everyone for not only for safety, but for comfort. We know that the mix of big trucks and automobiles does not work anymore. And of course, people need to be able to travel in comfort and not be feared about having to travel from Lethbridge to Medicine Hat or Medicine Hat to the Crow's Nest or wherever, so it's important that we have this down and downright.
Yeah, exactly. I know there's a nice big twinned area all through Lethbridge, but as soon as you get outside of those city limits, that's where you start getting into that two-way traffic, and it can get very, very scary in some of those areas, especially once you start getting into the pass and the mountains there. So this is very welcome for sure. What do you see, Bill, as the potential recreational and tourism benefits for this?
Well, the number one reason why people travel anywhere is for an experience. They want to experience what we have to offer here in southern Alberta. And of course, some people like to go to Waterton to experience the mountains, the hiking. Lots of people want to experience our trails. Lots of people want to experience our water reservoirs along here. Mm-hmm. So people will look on a map, and TripAdvisor happens to be the number one source for people's not only destination but their experience. And with with those experiences, they look for the best routed highways that are the safest, that are identified on a map as a major route, so major highway. So this all is works together, and it'll be fantastic to see the spin-offs from recreation, from tourism, from all those things that matter down here in the south.
Yeah, yeah. Now, speaking of tourism, of course, one of the main draws along that corridor is the Frank Slide Historical Site. But my understanding is that there's been some controversy over this project happening there because people are kind of worried about the potential impact that it could have on that historical site. And then, of course, the entire town is buried there along with the bodies of those that were killed in that tragic rock slide way back 100-some years ago. So there are some worries to that small community in that area, so that also that they could be cut off from drive-by potential business and tourism. So any thoughts on that?
Sure, we understand and we appreciate and we certainly respect the overall sensitivity and historical impact that this slide particularly has had on the overall community. And of course, now that that there's a historical destination to it, and of course all the other historical destinations, including the mines. You can name a number of tourism destination components to that people are really appreciating today with regards to not only just the Frank Slide itself, but also the other activities that take place there. And of course, people go there as part of cottage country now, and of course people go skiing, people go for watercraft. People, just want to enjoy a different element of our Canadian geography. So Highway 3 leads everyone through the Crow's Nest Pass, and of course, we understand too that the need for rerouting some of the big heavy traffic off of the downtown is really important, and Alberta Transportation has identified that very, very clearly and have offered a number of alignment options for consideration. And of course, the one dilemma that we do have is the fact that the CP Rail already has precedence over their route through the Crow's Nest Pass, and so that kind of confines our options in terms of alignment.
Okay, Bill, do we know when Phase 1 will be completed, and what are the estimated costs for that?
From what we understand is it'll take about 3 years to completion. So if we start in 2024, we can expect possibly that section or that phase of Highway 3 to be open and ready in the next 3 years. The cost from Tabor to Burdett is predicted to cost $180 million.
Wow. Okay, interesting. What kind of feedback are you getting on the twinning project from stakeholders like truckers and the ag sector, et cetera? We talked about businesses a little bit there.
Well, as we know, all our chambers of commerce all along Highway 3 are now reciprocal members of our association, and they are in full support of this project. That means a lot, not only to our chambers, but to all the stakeholders along Highway 3. And of course, we have a number of stakeholders who sit on our board as well and have been advocating very strongly about their need to move goods and services along Highway 3. So we have a number of transport companies. We have some building companies on our board. We have the sugar beet growers. We have the potato growers of Alberta on our board. So we have a number of stakeholders who are very excited about the prospects of twinning Highway 3.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time here, but really quickly, so we know phase 1 is beginning in 2024. It'll take 3 years. How many phases are there in total, and how long will the whole project take? And when will the next phase begin, phase 2?
Yes, so there's a total of 8 phases, and so the government is proudly proclaiming a 10-year window for completing these phases. Some of that will be doable, and of course we know that some of the engineering can take place simultaneously. So some of these phases can go in sequence, or not just in A, B, C, D, and E order. We can certainly see some engineering, some stuff happening simultaneously.
Okay, well, good to know. So we'll look forward to a lot of construction in the future, basically.
Yes, and of course, the way we understand it too is that that there won't be any closures to trans-province traffic.
And then, Bill, just before we go here, are there any final thoughts on this the Highway 3 twinning project?
Absolutely, we want to ensure that that our association is still on board with ensuring that several components to the project be done and done right. Number one would being, of course, rest stops. Number two, being animal crossings. And number three is really what we want to ensure is that there are an adequate number of entrances into our communities where the highway might be bypassed. So those are serious considerations and concerns from the municipalities that have been concerned about bypassing the community. So that is the one thing. The number two thing that we want to ensure is for federal support, and that is that this highway is really part of the Canadian national highway system. So we want to ensure that the federal government understands and knows that they as partners become a component of this twinning system. So Destination Canada has already identified Highway 3 in their tourism in their national tourism strategy, and so we're pleased with that. But again, it's those components that really make this project worthwhile.
And it looks like we're out of time, but Bill, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Bill Chapman is the president of the Highway 3 Twinning Development Association. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.